Welcome to the combined lecture for orientation and training of volunteers. Due to the shift in the class schedule, I decided to combine these two, and they're fairly similar, but I will make the distinctions so that you understand when orientation ends and training begins. So orientation versus training. It's really important that we are able to separate the two, because if we don't make a clear distinction, we'll often sort of skip over the orientation part. And while it seems obvious that people who are volunteering with you would understand what your organization is and what their role in it is without being told, because otherwise, how would they have chosen you? It's actually not that obvious. And as you start doing orientation with prospective volunteers, some of them will drop out of your volunteering experience because they'll realize it's not a good fit. And that's okay. Even though you want to encourage as many people as possible, it's important to both the volunteer and the organization that it's a good fit. So you want to think of orientation as the next step after selection in making sure that it's the right fit for that volunteer. So to further explain that, the ways that orientation and training differ is that the entire purpose of orientation is that the volunteer understands the organization. That's the purpose, the mission. Those are usually pretty well written out. So it's important that they not just read the mission, but really understand how it applies in their community or in their specific instance. The culture of the organization, and that's something it's really difficult to get from the website. So coming into your offices or your space and seeing people at work is really helpful to your volunteers, to understanding how formal, how hierarchical, and what those interactions are really like. They also need to understand operational practices, which we'll get into in a little bit more detail. It needs to be a welcoming experience. So it's really important that when you're bringing new people in and orienting them, that they really do feel like they have access. So this is not a time for inside jokes or cliquish behavior. It's helpful to clarify the relationships. When I was a 4-H agent, felt that it was really important that my volunteers understand how and when it was acceptable to contact me. Previous agents had a 24/7 text me, call me, whatever. And I like clear boundaries between work and home. And so getting everyone on the same page with what those relationships were, and not just the interpersonal relationship, but the relationship between them and the organization, how they're expected to represent the organization as well. And it's a good opportunity to define training needs. Another example of this is that in my when I was a 4-H agent, we had county vehicles, vans and cars that approved volunteers could sign out to use for club experiences, taking 4-H kids places or taking other leaders and going to a training. And we discovered that although several of them had the necessary paperwork, they had their driver's licenses, they absolutely were not comfortable with the idea of driving an 8 or 15 passenger van. And so we had to add that to training, was finding someone who could teach them that if they were interested. So it's a good opportunity to get to know each other and get to know where everyone's getting started. Conversely, training is very role specific. It's teaching them the things they have to know to fulfill their role within your organization. And I always hope that the things we teach in training are also beneficial in their personal lives or in their other professional life, that it's not just going to be applied in our organization, because I want them to be able to grow and apply it outside of our organization as well. Training can occur before or during engagement. We had some trainings that they were required to do before they were allowed to start running a club, and other trainings were ongoing and they took them as they could or as they came up in the calendar. And then the training needs to be really focused on what the volunteer needs to be able to do. So orientation, what is the organization? Training, what do I have to do? Is the first step in risk management. It's the first opportunity to really make sure that people understand your purpose and what some of those rules and policies are. Um, it is troublesome for any organization if a volunteer can come back later and say, I didn't know I wasn't allowed to ... And if you haven't told them, then you can actually be held liable for some of their actions, depending on what those things were. It's an opportunity to focus on understanding the organization and really making sure that they know why the organization exists, who your targeted clientele are, what your intended actions are. It's very easy for people to have a partial understanding of a mission and run off in the wrong direction with it. And soon they're doing something that's outside your mission or outside what you're allowed to fund. And that becomes problematic for the whole organization and damaging to those relationships. And orientation is usually done in a meeting or a series of meetings. During orientation, the volunteers are there for a specific purpose, and the volunteer managers are there for a specific purpose, and they don't always overlap. So it's important to keep in mind why your volunteers are there and what they need to get out of this orientation, and why you are there and what you need to get out of the orientation to make sure that you've designed it in such a way that you're both meeting your purposes. So volunteers, are there to understand the organization, what their role will be within it, get a clear understanding of the mission and purpose of the organization, get some insight into the culture. And that's why I think it's important to involve a lot of the staff, if possible, or other volunteers, if possible, in the orientation so that they can see those interpersonal relationships and see the different personalities that they're going to be working with. It helps them understand better how they'll fit. Then also it allows them to see their current volunteers are satisfied. So if you have a disgruntled volunteer, I would be really hesitant to ask him or her to help with orientation. There are certainly other places in the organization that they can help you with bringing new folks on, but I wouldn't necessarily do that in orientation because it's too easy to scare people off. It's a place to build enthusiasm, so it should be an upbeat, engaged, an interesting time, not a wah 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 boring presentation. You want them to build their comfort and confidence, so there should be some interaction with each other and with existing volunteers and staff, so that they are building a sense that they can fit in and that they will have some friendly interactions. They need to become much clearer on how they specifically, how each individual will contribute to the organization. People like to know how much time is expected of them and on what kind of a calendar. And so as much of that as you can provide in orientation as possible is best, because people like to know what they're getting into. Of course, you have to go through rules, policies, and resources. We always give a big binder that has all the rules and policies in it. And then we hit the key ones, the big ones, or the ones that help them make decisions. It's a good chance to help them understand the clientele. We had, on occasion, some really stellar 4-H youth who helped us present our orientation, and that always really helped explain to our incoming volunteers what our goal was. Our goal was to develop youth who could come contribute at that level. And they were usually very much impressed by those kids and eager to get in and work with kids with that kind of potential. You're building a connection as well. If at the end of orientation your volunteers leave the room and someone from your organization has not had one-on-one time, at least get a name and some little bit of information about them, they may not come back because they may not feel appreciated or connected. And it would be a terrible reason to lose someone. And then it also helps them understand the emotional reality of the position they're about to go into. Some volunteer positions are really emotionally demanding, and it's important that people know that up front so that they can prepare themselves to be in the right frame of mind and the right emotional space to handle that. It's unfair to spring that on people. And I'm thinking about, volunteering in places where people are really ill or with really difficult populations or extreme poverty or anything that could be really emotionally traumatic to people. They need to be prepared for that. Your purpose as a volunteer manager, and I know you're presenting information or you're helping the people who are presenting information for you, and that's a lot already, but you need to be doing at the same time is using this as an opportunity to evaluate the people you've already selected into the organization to make sure that you know what their needs are and what their potential is. So are you seeing something in the interactions you're having with them or that your staff is having with them that lead you to thinking about a different role, an increased role, or a more demanding role that person might play in the future? You could also have the chance to look at how they're interacting with other people, and that may become a training need. There may need to be some conversation skills or interpersonal etiquette skills training. Communication skills, again, these all really start to depend on what role that person's going to play, but it's important that you can see that they can follow directions, that they can work in a team, that they can provide a whole answer when asked a question. So you're looking for those skills. You're also looking for their level of engagement and their punctuality. People who show up late, now I know lateness happens, right? We all have gone out and our car didn't start or we got stuck in horrific traffic or something, but on the whole, people who show up late for orientation, sit in the back, and don't engage are probably not going to really engage in your organization. So this is a good time to start getting that warning. When you're designing your orientation, you need to be thinking about giving someone a complete snapshot, a complete picture of what your organization is. It should include tours of the facilities. So for us, that was the whole extension office, the training center that they could use, which was like an auditorium that they could sign out, where the equipment is kept, and what pieces of that equipment they're allowed to use, how they can access using our copier, our printers, our computers, the vans, the demo kitchen. All of those things were part of our orientation. And of course, no one can memorize all of that, but it helps them remember that those things exist if you physically walk them through. It also helps them meet people, and those introductions are essential. They need to know who is, for example, my administrative assistant. So what was her role? Is she the one they're talking to when someone picks up the phone? What does she do in the organization? What did I, as the agent, do? What did my program assistant do? What was the receptionist's name and job? Who were the other professionals in the office? So that when they came in, they at least had some idea of who they were running into in the hallways or at our programs. Some general information about the organization, and that's where I tend to give people sort of the printed flyers of what our mission is, how many kids we served, where we were in the county already, that sort of thing. I always did those first three things when they came in to deliver their paperwork. So when they filled out their application and brought it back in, I did those first three things. That gave me some one-on-one time with them, or my PA some one-on-one time with them. And it gave me a chance to sort of talk to each one individually, feel them out, and get them comfortable with the space and with us. So that then when they came into our formal orientation session, they were already attuned to who we were and what we were doing. So when you're designing your orientation session, it's really important that you really drive home what your mission is and what that person's role will be within the mission. That you provide them with a chance to give you feedback on whether or not you met their needs and expectations, what else they still need to learn. Again, mission, I'm going to just keep saying it because I think it gets missed so often. Your vision, which is separate from your mission, right? Where do you want your organization to be in 6 months, a year, 5 years? What are the goals of the organization that they can then decide, do I share those goals? Do I buy into those goals? And what's your purpose? So I always like to give targets like, we want 5 more clubs this year. We want participation in county public speaking contests to go up by 25%. Whatever those visions and short and long-term goals were needed to be shared with the volunteers. Management and procedural information, which varies a lot depending on the role someone's going to take, but knowing that they know that paperwork is due at a certain amount of time, or these are the people you get the answers to these questions. And then an opportunity for some social or cultural interaction is essential. People need to have the chance to get to know each other so that they feel like they belong. I joined a volunteer orchestra a year ago, and 6 months in, still no one had walked up to me during break or in the hallway or while we were warming up or while I was packing up afterwards and introduced themselves or said hi. And so I still don't feel like I really belong. And you don't want that to happen to your volunteers, because people will leave if they don't feel connected. Orientation, not only do you have to think about all the topics you have to cover, but you have to think about who's going to facilitate each piece. Again, I like to bring in as many people as I can who are qualified to do this kind of work, so that people in the organization have a wide variety of people who they have met, who they feel comfortable with, because quite honestly, no matter how friendly you are, some people are going to connect better with someone else. There were volunteers. We always joked I had my volunteers and my program assistant had her volunteers. But we had volunteers who only ever called me or emailed me, and other volunteers who only ever called my PA or emailed her. And if they got the other one on the phone or something, that was fine. But their intention was always to go to one of us because that's who they felt the most comfortable with. And that's fine. As long as everybody's giving out the same information, that's fine. So I think it's important to have your variety of people present at orientation, delivering sessions, and if they're not capable of delivering a session, at least sitting there and participating and getting to know your newcomers. So I was in the role of volunteer manager. I had an administrative assistant and a program associate who also interacted with our volunteers. There were other agents in the building: horticulture, family and consumer sciences, and natural resources. They would pop in and out of orientation because they worked with us. We all did cross-programming. And of course, my county director and our county reception staff as well all participated in some way in our orientation program. My PA and I did the bulk of the program delivery piece. And then we had some top-notch volunteers, and we had them come in and help deliver sessions, because it's so much better to hear it from somebody who's doing exactly what you plan on doing, and they can answer the boots on the ground questions, and it's more authentic that way. Plus, you're building those relationships. Decisions based on audience. I keep talking. Ours were almost entirely face-to-face. I was dealing with baby boomers and older millennials for the most part as my volunteers. They still, particularly the baby boomers, still prefer the face-to-face contact. It was parts of our county were quite rural, where they didn't have a great internet connection. So while online content is fantastic, people in many places, my parents, for example, who live in New Jersey, can't get a good enough internet connection to stream video. So it's important that you think about that. Is there an extra hardship by making people come to something face-to-face? Are you making sure to plan it when people are off from work? Are you providing options for childcare if need be? For some of those audiences, perhaps an online self-paced thing is better, but we do have people who can't access online or who are not comfortable accessing online. And so you have to make some tough decisions about what's best for the organization and the potential volunteers. I like blended content. I like making some of it available online and some of it face-to-face. And for people who are really resistant to the online learning, then I was able to offer small sessions for them to do the stuff that was already online. You can set it up as modules. We called it our volunteer passport, where people got stamped off, mostly because my administrative assistant loved giving people stickers. but it got stickers for each module that they completed. You can do it as a checklist instead. I always kept the checklist for myself. So for record keeping purposes, as each person came in and completed different pieces, I could check it off to make sure we hit everything with that volunteer, and let them keep the passport with the stamps for their own record keeping. And then you also have to make decisions about multi-day or single day sessions. And those really need to be based on your audience and when they're available. If they're only available from 6 to 9 at night, you need to know that, and you need to plan your time accordingly. And I want to apologize right now for my voice. I'm getting over a cold, so you're going to hear me sipping water and trying to preserve my throat a little bit. So here is a sample volunteer orientation. This is actually my outline for what I did as the 4-H agent in Brunswick County, which is my biggest experience as a volunteer manager, and so it's the one I'll most often refer to. As paperwork is submitted, so when they come back with all their forms to fill out and turn in, we give them a tour of the facility. We introduce them to the other staff. We explained the space, equipment, and vehicles that were available and touched on how you went about signing them out. I don't expect people to remember that. I expect that the first time they want to sign that stuff out, they're going to call me and say, didn't you have a van we could use? How do I? So it's just important to show it to them and physically walk them through that so that it sticks in their mind that those things are available. We gave them an organizational chart with our contact information on it so that they would remember which programs my PA was leading, which ones I was leading, so that they would know who to call about which one or email. What things my secretary, my administrative assistant, was able to handle. And so if they couldn't get one of us because we were out programming, they could still ask her. And what things they should skip us in line and go straight to the county director with. And it was really important for us that they understand that and know that and have a physical copy. And it saved them a lot of guessing. A chance for them to ask some questions and get some answers. And I like to build that in. I'm a big believer that people loosen up when there's food. And it may just be because I really like to eat, but I'm a big believer that people loosen up when there's food. So I always ended our tour in our kitchen, where we always had coffee brewing and some delicious little snacks going because we all liked using the demo kitchen. So I would always end in our demo kitchen and offer a cup of coffee or a cup of tea and just sit and chat for a minute, and let people ask any questions they have or get some clarification. And I do think that's a good thing to build in some way. And then I would send them an email immediately after that with links to some of the videos to preview some content. Our organization, 4-H, has a national headquarters and state organizations, and so different states and the national are always producing really great videos and online content about what our programs are. And so I would send them links specific to what they might be interested in or about our organization in general. I never required that they watch them. Again, not everyone had a good enough internet connection, but it gave them a chance to dive in right away. Because I know we all get very excited about stuff, and then you have to wait a week or 2 weeks, and you start to lose a little bit of traction. So it was a good way to keep them engaged between that tour and their orientation session, which Clover Camp, because the 4-H emblem is the clover, happened at our county office. As people came in, they made their own name tents, and their name tents had their name. I feel like that's obvious, but had their name, the role they wanted to play or thought they were going to play in our organization, and some sort of picture or image to introduce themselves. And then we would go around the room and everyone did a brief introduction of themselves and how they had chosen that image. And I either led that as the agent or my PA led it, just depending on who was available and what we were doing. We would then go over what the 4-H mission is, which is positive youth development with a network of caring adults. I'm paraphrasing, but explaining what those pieces mean and what our roles were and their roles would be within that network of caring adults does not mean that the agent and the PA are present at every 4-H event. It means that the volunteers work with us to form that network. What our delivery modes are. So typically when people think about 4-H, they think about the club where the kid is raising the cow and taking it to the county fair. And certainly lots of kids are still doing that, but 4-H actually has 3 delivery modes. One is those traditional clubs where the kids are doing Lego robotics or puppetry or raising rabbits, whatever the project area might be. And there's a volunteer leading the club or a group of volunteers leading the club, and they meet on a regular basis. So that's one delivery mode, the club model. The second is in-school programming, where we do things like embryology, where we bring eggs and you hatch them in your classroom, and there's little mini lessons throughout the 28 days or so it takes for them to hatch. And then we come and pick the eggs back up. Well, the chickens, hopefully not. They're hopefully not still eggs at the end of 28 days. So there's in-school programming, and we have those at all K-12, kindergarten through high school levels. And then there are special programs. And those are things like our one-day programs. Maybe we have a insect day at the county botanical gardens, and we invite anybody that wants to come. Or we have summer camps that people can come to, whether they're members of clubs or not. So club model, in-school instruction, and special programs. And we teach our volunteers about those because there are different roles that they could play in each of those. A lot of our retired teachers loved helping us do our in-school programming. And since it was a huge county with a lot of distance between schools, I took them up on it. I could send them into a school to teach a lesson. And that was a lot of fun for both of us. And then 4-H in action. And we had an activity that we would facilitate, but we would bring in experienced volunteers to take them through what a club year looks like, and what the volunteer actually does. And it was a group activity, and then they would share out to the large group. Then we would do a snack break, because that group activity led naturally into some getting to know you that carried over into the snack break and gave them a chance to chat for a few minutes. And then we would bring them back for questions and answers so far. And then we would talk about how we fit in the land-grant mission, because 4-H is actually part of the land-grant university in each state. So Rutgers oversees the state program for 4-H in the state of New Jersey, Penn State in Pennsylvania. Here where I live in North Carolina, it's NC State and NC A&T oversee it together. So explaining how the role the university plays in that and the role we play in the university. And then I would bring my county director in to sort of be the mean one, and talk about behavioral expectations. He really upbeat guy, not great at being mean, but it carried a little bit more gravitas coming from him than it did from me. Plus, it gave them all a chance to meet him and see what his role was. Then we would have our expert volunteers talk to them about what it means to be a volunteer, and what they have gotten out of the volunteer experience. And I think it's really important that those expert volunteers participate in that conversation, because I can tell you that Miss Jane learned these skills and they helped her in her career, but it means more coming from Miss Jane. And so, again, it's also that relationship building. Sometimes they're a little less comfortable calling our office to ask a question, but they might ask another volunteer because it's a more casual relationship. Another piece we did in our orientation of being welcoming and helping people get to know each other is we had new volunteers work together to write a little blurb about each other or themselves that we would include in our next newsletter. So, welcome Miss Bonnie. She's taking over the Lego Robotics Club, and she would write a little bit about herself, so that all the kids and adults in the program, at least when they heard her name, already had something to attach it to. We then went through the ACE Awards checklist. The ACE Award is a state program in North Carolina that awards excellence in volunteer service. and it lists the trainings that they should take each year, and there's increasing levels of complexity. And I've uploaded a copy of that into this week's module so you can see what I'm talking about. It gives them a chance to record the trainings they've attended and maps out which ones they should plan to attend each year. Reflect on those experiences, list the service projects that that they have helped youth accomplish, and keep track of how this experience has changed them and how they've benefited from it. So we go through the ACE Awards checklist with them so that they understand the training that we ask of them later. And then we show them how to access our county calendars so that they can book rooms, know when events are, and we ask them not to plan club events over top of county events because it cuts into the attendance for both. And we show them how to access all of our different electronic calendars and what our expectations are for helping your youth use our calendar and helping your club meet our calendar, and sharing your events with us so we can put them on there. So that's the procedural stuff. You to hit pause and do your in-class activity for this section of today's lecture, which is to find a sample volunteer orientation plan and post it to the discussion board. And tell the rest of the class, if your sample covers everything that needs to be in an orientation, why or why not, and what you would add or remove. So go ahead and hit pause and do that, and then come back for the second part of the training. All right, so volunteer training. Welcome back from the discussion board. Please remember to go back and comment on each other's and pose questions to each other so that it's truly a discussion. But now we're going to launch into training. So we talked about orientation. Orientation is before they start their work with the organization. Training can happen before or during the work. So it's important that we find out what they already know how to do. I don't need to spend a lot of time on something. If I have a room full of people who are parliamentarians and experts in Robert's Rules of Order, we don't need to spend a lot of time on that. But if none of them have ever planned an educational experience for kids, then we needed to spend a lot of time on that. So it's important that you know where they are when they come in the door. So what do they know and what do they need to know? So you need to know what you expect of your volunteers and then be able to match their incoming skills. So people can skip trainings if they are already experts. My preference is to bring them in and have them help present instead, because we all need refreshers all the time. Trainings are general and role specific. So you need to figure out the general skills that all of your volunteers need. So for us, for 4-H, that was they all need skills in positive youth development. And that's things like how to plan a program, how to give praise that's meaningful to kids, how to interact interpersonally with kids, ages and stages of youth development so that you know that what you've planned for 8-year-olds is appropriate for 8-year-olds. General etiquette, we hold our volunteers to a high behavioral standard. We want them to not engage in unsuitable behavior or conversation around children, and so we have to teach them that. And then experiential learning is the backbone of 4-H, and making sure that they understand that all of our learning has to be attached to kids actually doing something is an essential piece. And so we do those trainings for all of our volunteers. But then there are role-specific skills. Perhaps you're not running a club. Well, if you're not running a club or serving on one of our volunteer boards that votes on things, you don't really need to learn parliamentary procedure, so we don't need to require that you come to that training. Similarly, if you're just coming as a judge or doing a few cooking classes with our youth, but not an ongoing thing, we don't need to worry about the record keeping or the bookkeeping, right? So those are role specific. Our club leaders need parliamentary procedure, record keeping, bookkeeping, running meetings, and public presentations, because we expect all of our youth to do those things in the clubs. But then, for example, the robotics club leader doesn't need to come to poultry management. She's invited to, but she doesn't have to come. Similarly, the Lego robotics leader doesn't need to come to using a serger, which is a sewing skill. So it's knowing which things each person really has to come to because you don't want to waste people's time. We always made all of ours open to whoever wanted to attend and then required them of people who needed those skills in their role. And this gets to developing a training plan for each volunteer or group of volunteers. Again, it's essential to know what they already know. So my volunteers who were retired elementary school teachers who I was sending into the classroom to do in-school programming, I didn't need to teach the retired elementary school teachers about how to interact with 8-year-olds. But I did need to teach them our specific curriculum and the expectations that go with it. So it's knowing what they already know, which you should find out in your identification, selection, and orientation process. And then developing a plan with increasing complexity and depth. They should not be going to the exact same training every year. There need to be levels to encourage deeper engagement and a better skill set. I believe that because I believe that the volunteer should be benefiting and growing from the experience. And so I believe that we should be sending them to increasing complexity or involving them more in delivering the training each year so that they're still learning something. There should be some choice. Again, does my horse judging coach need to go to a record keeping presentation? Probably not. So there should be some flexibility there. There should be opportunities to learn from and to teach each other. So bring those expert volunteers in to help. They love it. The new volunteers love it. It's a really great opportunity. We even brought kids in to help with training, which they just got such a kick out of the fact that they were teaching adults. And then have a tracking system for yourself and for your volunteers so that everybody keeps track of which sessions they've already been to, and you have it for reporting and awards. How do you know what training you need to offer? I felt very fortunate as the 4-H agent that the state program dictated a lot of the training that our volunteers had to have, and that was mostly from a risk management standpoint. They would say you can't turn them loose with kids until they've had these trainings. But you still have to be thinking, too, about your specific situation. So brainstorm with your other staff about what things people need to know how to do to be effective for your organization. Ask your existing volunteers, what was the best training you went to and why? What skill do you wish you had? What skill do you wish your fellow volunteers had? And particularly that one, that which skill do you wish your fellow volunteers had, gets at the thing they're already good at that they wish everybody else was good at too, and then you can tap them to teach it if that's appropriate. You need to look at similar programs. So I took a look at what scouting programs were asking volunteers to do, what schools were asking volunteers to do, and I wanted to make sure that we were covering our bases and really thinking about that. And then ask incoming volunteers, what makes you nervous? What skill do you want to work on? What do you think you need? All of those pieces are important. We had a county advisory board, and that was made up of people from the community who helped steer the direction of our program. And I often asked them as well, what skills do you think someone needs to do this, or what skills do you think they're lacking? And from that, you create a list which you can then boil down. So here's a sample training plan. And again, take a look at the ACE award packet that I post in the module, because that dictated a lot of the training that our volunteers were required to have or that they needed to have so that they could pursue awards. And out of fairness to my volunteers, I wanted to make sure that they had access to the trainings that the state would count toward the awards. And there were a couple of different opportunities for that. There were state level and regional trainings offered for volunteers, so I didn't have to provide all of them out of my office. But what we would do every year is we would kick off January, the second week in January, with a volunteer extravaganza. We would invite all of our adult and youth volunteers and people from the surrounding counties to a day-long extravaganza where we had rotating workshops. And I would bring in agents and PAs from other counties. Sometimes people from the state office were able to come, and my expert volunteers to help lead sessions. I absolutely every year offered the same 4 trainings, and then there were others that I offered for our more advanced volunteers to take. But every year we had parliamentary procedure, etiquette for today's 4-H volunteer, understanding the ages and stages of youth development, and running effective meetings. And we would offer those 4 in a rotating workshop fashion so that everybody could attend all 4. All our new volunteers could attend all 4. And then I offered some upper level training depending on our needs or what our volunteers really needed for our more experienced volunteers so that they could be continuing their development. But our brand new volunteers had to go to the 4 that are listed under Volunteer Extravaganza. We did that in January every year. We also offered it, 2 years, we offered it at another time during the year because we had a whole group of volunteers ready to go together. So that was a little bit flexible. We also invited people from Scouts, YMCA, PTO, and some of our church groups to send their volunteers for parliamentary procedure, ages and stages, and running effective meetings, because those were skills they all needed as well. And so there's no reason to duplicate efforts. Then we also had a youth development book club that met monthly. My PA and I chose the book each year. Sometimes a volunteer would give us an idea, depending. And through the book club, which was usually a book dealing with youth leadership skills, we would teach experiential learning, planning your program using the targeted life skills model, and coaching public speaking. And these are all required for the 2nd level of our ACE Awards program. So it was a great way for people to continue to develop in their training. And then different years, depending on what the book was, we offered other topics as well. But these are the ones we always offered. Either by us driving or providing vans for people to go to, regional and state offerings in effective teaching and learning, leadership basics, youth and adult partnerships, advanced leadership skills, marketing 4-H, and diversity and inclusion. And those are the workshops that are required for people who want to get the gold or emerald level ACE award. And so typically they're offered once a year at the state or regional level, and volunteers travel to them. So we provided access to those and scholarships. And then we did specialized training as needed. So leading up to our county, some of our big county events or our county 4-H fair, we offered a training in how to judge 4-H projects and give meaningful feedback to kids. We offered training we had never had a 4-H fair before, so we started a fair board and then had to teach them how to self-govern. So we did a training on developing and running a fair. We did a training on developing a constitution. We did trainings on the financial aspect of running a club that is under a nonprofit shelter, nonprofit umbrella. So there were specific trainings for specialized roles as well. Excuse me. And we kept record of which trainings each volunteer had attended, so we could track their attendance and participation. And it's because some were required. And for risk management, I had to make sure that everyone had attended them and participated in them. But it also made it possible for us to report achievements and certify when people sent their portfolios off for their awards that, yep, they did come to these trainings with us. We also took a lot of pictures and put out press releases for the paper because it's important to recognize your volunteers, which is a later topic. But if you're not taking pictures of them doing stuff, the newspaper does not care. They want those action shots. And then we also kept track of requests they had for specific training for the future. If they ask for something, they're much more likely to attend it. So we want to make sure that we're keeping track of the things they ask for. The class activity and discussion board related to training plans. I want you to find an example of a training plan. Each of you needs to find one. And the same questions as we looked at for the orientation session. Does it cover everything? Why or why not? And what would you add or remove? Some of these are going to be really detailed with times and dates, and some of them are just going to be what I gave you for my experience, which was topics. But find an example, post, and discuss. I look forward to seeing what you all come up with. Feel free to tear away at mine and tell me what I was missing. I love that kind of feedback. And we'll reconvene next week for utilization.